The narcissist's ego, the narcissist's core identity are missing. Pathological narcissism is a disruption in the formation of a constellated, integrated self. It's the inability to coalesce around the central ego. The narcissist has no ego. He has no self. He has no core identity. The narcissist is absence masquerading as presence, something which applies equally well or equally validly to the borderline. I'm tough, I'm resilient, I'm rough, I'm strong, I'm empowered, I'm untouchable, I'm immune. I am the malignant psychopathic narcissist, so I can go straight to the point, avoiding and skipping all the interim stages, which are for more subtle and compliant and submissive narcissists. Malignant psychopathic narcissist looks down at typical narcissist. He considers them weak, too weak for his own taste. Actually, malignant psychopathic narcissists take advantage of typical narcissists. They abuse them. They regard typical narcissists as delusional and gullible, which they are. Because the narcissist is actually purposeful, but not intentional. It is the psychopath who is scheming, cunning, Machiavellian, manipulative, goal-oriented. It is the psychopath who is essentially, in many cases, sadistic and evil and wicked, if only because the psychopath is callous and ruthless and couldn't care less about the impact and consequences of his actions. The psychopath can tell the difference between right and wrong, between reality and fantasy. The narcissist, in most cases, cannot tell the difference between reality and fantasy. He is delusional. He believes his own confabulations, his own promises, and the fantasy that he's embedded in and that he is trying to impose on you, the shared fantasy. This inability to tell apart reality from delusions, reality from fantasy, means that often the narcissist acts in ways which are unintentional, of which he is unconscious and unaware of. This is not true of the psychopath. Now back to the original opening question. So, psychopathy is a compensatory mechanism for anxiety. But the psychopath is truly obsessed with power. He wants to have real power. This is not a grandiose fantasy, as is the case with narcissism. The narcissist imagines having power, imagines his or her own superiority, godlike perfection, and that's enough. The narcissist doesn't care about reality. The narcissist is 100% embedded in fantasy. He is vigilant. He is protective of the fantasy, the narcissist. He is very fragile and vulnerable. The fantasy of the narcissist is attack. The narcissist is in panic and lashes out, becomes aggressive and violent and so on. But it is the fantasy that concerns the narcissist. The psychopath is concerned with reality. Psychopath's reality testing is intact. Psychopath doesn't live in fantasy. He uses fantasy. He shares fantasies with others in order to motivate them to behave in ways which are conducive to favorable outcomes. He uses fantasy as he uses anything else. He uses empathy. He uses love. He uses fantasy. Psychopaths would use anything to accomplish goals, to secure outcomes. But they are very, very grounded psychopaths, very reality-based. Their feet are on the ground at all times. And so the psychopath really seeks power. And he seeks power over other people because that way he can scare them. He can induce in them and inculcate in them fear. And then using this fear, he can motivate them to do his bidding, to cater to his needs, to help him to accomplish his goals. So he needs real power. But how would the psychopath convince himself that he does indeed have power over others? By hurting them. The psychopath hurts other people as a way to probe them, as a way to test them. The psychopath inflicts pain and hurt and damage on other people because he wants to learn the outside limits of his own power, the extent of his control over these people, over his victims. He victimizes people simply in order to establish a hierarchy and to ascertain how far he can go.